We already saw a little bit of how to navigate in the viewports. Let's go deeper into that. Once again, the viewport navigation tools are in the lower right-hand corner of the 3ds Max interface. So down here you will see the viewport controls. And we've got the zoom tool that's enabling us to dolly forward and back in the viewport. So it's not really zooming. That's a bit of a misnomer. On a real camera, the zoom is actually the focal length or the field of view or angle of view. It's an optical property of the camera. It's not the distance to the subject. So again, this is a bit of a misnomer. This zoom tool actually changes our distance. We're moving farther away or closer. So technically that's a dolly. Then we've got the little hand tool, and that one's labeled pan. And that again, unfortunately, is a misnomer. Basically, it's not a pan. A pan in cinema is the camera sitting in one place and turning on its axis to, rotate left or right. It's a panorama. This is more accurately known as a truck or a track. So in fact, we're actually moving our point of view relative to the scene. I'll dolly forward a little bit with the zoom tool, and then truck or track with that inappropriately named pan tool. Okay, so I'm actually changing my position when I use that hand tool. Then we've also got the field of view control here, and that's a true zoom. So we click on field of view and then click in the viewport. What we're doing is we're optically zooming in closer. The camera stays in one place, but we take in less or more of the field of view. So we could have a very wide angle shot, or we could have a very tight shot zoomed in. And be careful about this, because if you're not really paying attention, you can get some really weird results. So for example, if I zoom way out, I'm going to get massive perspective distortion. I'll zoom in here now, or more appropriately, I'm going to dolly in, getting closer. And you can see that the viewport's looking really strange. It's because I've got an extremely wide angle lens on this now. And that's because I've, inappropriately used this field of view control. So if you see that happen, then click on field of view and you want to zoom in, get closer and tighter, and then use the magnifying glass to dolly back out again. Okay, so this is all very non-standard if you're used to video and cinema conventions. The naming is all really messed up here. The tools all work the same way. They're just called by the wrong names. Now, the other important tool that you need to know about is the orbit tool, also known as arc rotate. And that's this one down here that looks like a little circle. Click on that. And now you'll see this yellow circle in the middle of the screen. What you want to do to use this is to click in the center of the circle. That's actually going to orbit your view around the objects. You don't usually want to click on the outside of the circle, because if you do that, you're going to create something called a Dutch tilt or a canted angle. So if I click outside that circle, I'm turning the camera relative to its line of sight, and you generally don't want to do that. This now brings up the question of how do we undo our viewport movements? And if you actually try to use the undo up here, or use the keyboard shortcut of Control-Z, your camera will not go back to where it was before. And 3ds Max, like many 3D programs, actually has two sets of undos. One is for scene commands, like creating an object, or moving an object, or making animation keyframes, and so on. Those are scene commands, and they're dealt with through this undo up here. But viewport commands, just navigating, are in a completely different undo buffer. And to access the viewport undos, you'll need to click on the label of the viewport, in this case, perspective. And then go down here and you will see an undo here. Undo view rotate. Click on that. And you may need to do it more than once. As you can see, I needed to do it twice. So now it's undone that viewport movement. And as you saw, the hotkey for that is Shift-Z or capital Z. So Control-Z is for creating and moving objects, and Shift-Z is for undoing viewport commands. Those are the most important viewport commands. There's a couple other things. Like I said earlier, we have the ability to maximize viewports. So that's maximize and minimize. We also have the ability to zoom to the extents of the selected objects. That's this cube. So if I click on that with nothing selected, the viewport will zoom out to enclose all of the geometry. But if I use the Select Object tool and then click on a particular object like my cube, and then click on Zoom Extent Selected, the viewport will zoom in, or dolly in more precisely, to frame that particular cube. And again, if nothing is selected and I click that button, then we will dolly back to take in the entire scene. And next to that is also the ability to zoom extends all viewports. Once again, if I select my cube and then click on this button, now all of the viewports will frame that particular cube. And if I click to select nothing and click that button again, all the viewports will dolly back to enclose all of the objects. So that's how you use the icons to navigate in the viewports. Most of the time, however, you're going to use the hotkeys. We'll cover that in the following movie.